Unbeknownst to the United States, Napoleon had recently given up his goal of a new world empire. This happened because of events on the island of Santo Domingo, modern-day Haiti. The island's leader was Toussaint Louverture, a former slave who led a successful rebellion in the 1790s, overthrowing the European powers. Napoleon sent troops to reclaim the island in 1802. The French were defeated by yellow fever as much as the military prowess of Louverture's forces. Having lost in the Caribbean, Napoleon hoped to use the money from the sale of Louisiana for his upcoming war in Europe. These series of events help to explain Napoleon's sale of Louisiana. This map shows American expansion from 1800 to 1860. The solid green segment shows the original 13 states and territories, while the area in the outline shows the Louisiana Territory. It included much of the interior of today's United States, not just the state of Louisiana. No one was sure exactly what was out there or the true western border of American territory, yet this was an incredibly large tract of land. As a believer in a strict interpretation of the Constitution, Jefferson was troubled by the fact the Constitution did not provide steps for the purchase of new territories. He initially considered a constitutional amendment to fix this omission, but decided against it as he was concerned Napoleon might change his mind. He then submitted the purchase to Congress as he believed it was the best thing for the nation. The purchase of Louisiana was popular among many in the public at large. The nation next had to determine what it had actually bought from the French. Even before the Louisiana Purchase, President Jefferson hoped to finance a mission to explore the West. Eventually, Congress authorized the Corps of Discovery. The two leaders were Meriwether Lewis, Jefferson's personal secretary, and William Clark, an Army officer and explorer. The group was small, with only 27 other members, including Clark's slave, York. Lewis and Clark had several goals. Jefferson wanted this to be a scientific expedition. They were to provide specific descriptions of the land as well as plant and animal life. Tools, like the standard surveyor's chain shown here, were used to create accurate maps, but they also studied the land for its economic potential. They were also charged with learning as much as they could about Native Americans. To facilitate this, Lewis and Clark brought with them over 20 bags of gifts for Indian leaders. Members of the expedition set out in May of 1804 from St. Louis. St. Louis is circled on the map. Their charge was to follow the course of the Missouri River northward, as shown in red. The first year's winter was spent at Fort Mandan among the Mandan Indians in North Dakota. Over the course of the entire journey, they came into contact with many Native Americans. With the Mandans, they hunted together, traded with one another, and socialized together in many ways. This intimate socialization allowed them to make first-hand observations of the way in which they lived, even if it did lead to some misunderstandings between the two groups. They continued their journey in 1805 and made it to the Pacific Ocean by November, spending the next winter at Fort Clatsop in Oregon. Their second winter was also positive. However, while in Oregon, they often complained in their journals about the gray skies and almost constant rain. In 1806, they returned home. Overall, this was a very successful journey. The trip was facilitated by the presence of Sacagawea, the Shoshone wife of their guide and interpreter, Charbonneau. She played an important role as a translator and was familiar with some of the geography of the region. The mere presence of a woman with a newborn child sent an important message. This was an expedition of peace rather than a war party. The expedition led to several important results for the nation. First, their observations of the land, including plant and animal life, proved helpful for future travelers. They were able to provide detailed descriptions of the flora and fauna they encountered and developed important maps like the one shown here. This was a map of their travels drawn by William Clark. His description of the Rockies was accurate for the most part, but the Southwest was less accurate. While their descriptions of Native Americans may have included bias, they contained helpful information about the ways in which Indians lived. This was important for people living in the early 19th century, but also for many anthropologists and historians today. Finally, their winter spent on the Pacific Ocean helped strengthen American claims to Oregon and Washington. The Oregon Country, shown in yellow and circled on this map, eventually became the United States territory by the 1840s. The fact that members of the expedition built a fort, spent a winter, and mapped this area added to American claims. For more information about the Lewis and Clark expedition, you may click on the hyperlink below. Some have called the War of 1812 the Second War for American Independence. We'll investigate some of the background to this war next. There were several factors which led to war between the Americans and the British in the War of 1812. The first dealt with trading rights and the impressment of American sailors. Following the return of war in Europe in 1803, American rights as neutral trading powers became an issue. Over the first years of the war, Americans benefited as the United States supplied grain and other supplies to Europe. However, in 1805, both the British and French attempted to block each other's trade. They each seized American ships and their cargoes if they were caught trading with the other nation. As if that wasn't bad enough, there was the impressment of American sailors by the British. Because the pay for sailors was low and working conditions were horrid, some British sailors jumped ship and joined American vessels where conditions were better. The Royal Navy began stopping American ships looking for deserters. Sometimes former British subjects were forced to return, but it's estimated about 6,000 American citizens, like the one shown in this image, were victims of impressment between 1803 and 1812. This also led to the Chesapeake Leopard Affair in 1807. The USS Chesapeake, an American warship, refused to be boarded by the Leopard, a British frigate. The British ship fired at close range, leaving 3 Americans dead and wounding several others. 4 deserters were seized, 3 of which had become American citizens. The Chesapeake Leopard Affair left many in the United States calling for war. In response to this confrontation and hoping to avoid war, Jefferson supported the Embargo Act. This act prohibited all American exports to any country. Jefferson hoped the French and British would be so dependent upon American exports they would be forced to respect American shipping and neutrality. It was incredibly unpopular and just didn't work. While smuggling did take place, unemployment skyrocketed. James Madison followed Jefferson into the presidency in 1809. He supported an easing of the trade embargo, but American ships continued to be seized by both the French and British. However, because the British ruled the seas, Americans turned their anger toward the British rather than the French. Another cause of the War of 1812 dealt with British interaction with Native Americans living in the Northwest Territory. As more settlers moved westward in the early 1800s, they once again came into conflict with Native Americans in the Old Northwest. One objection many Indian leaders had was that American officials would sometimes negotiate treaties with individuals who had no authority to engage in treaty making. There were also repeated violations of treaties by American settlers. One Indian leader upset at these events was the Shawnee chief Tecumseh. Tecumseh was an experienced warrior with natural charisma who worked with his brother, a religious leader named the Prophet, toward a goal of creating an Indian confederacy. Tecumseh hoped to include Native Americans not just from the Ohio Valley, but from Canada to the American South. He encouraged Indian settlement in towns such as Tippecanoe as a challenge to the Americans.